Hello, viewers. Today, it's an honor that our show is adorned by Larry Johnson, a famous superstar, I would say, in kind of geopolitics, like international security affairs. Larry Johnson actually needs no introduction, but just to kind of inform our audience, Larry Johnson is an ex-CIA analyst. Those who know about the agency knows that one of the brightest minds in the U.S. actually goes in the agency, especially the US CIA analytical work, the analyst work. And Ray has been an analyst for 5 years or so. Then he kind of started joined the State Department for a few years, and then he worked on his business consultancy and the intelligence work. So, without further ado, I will introduce my audience to Larry Johnson.
Well, thank you for your generous introduction. You're way too kind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, Larry, without further ado, we just kind of straight delve into like our show. Basically, for the first question I have for you is, if you can lay out for our audience, what is a kind of general balance of power in the world? I have heard about Professor John Mearsheimer talk about this multipolarity. So, what do you make of the current balance of power in the world? U.S. vis-a-vis China and Russia bloc?
Well, we're in a period of great transition. Really, and I use the start of the special military operation in Ukraine as sort of that moment where with the full break with the previous order started and the emergence of the new order began. Under the previous order, the United States, since the end of World War II, has dominated the world by virtue of its economy, by virtue of its size of its military, and the ability to project off of it. For example, the U-2 in Pakistan and flew missions over the Soviet Union from there. And then once the United States became engaged with providing covert funding for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the war against the Soviets from 1980 to 1988, 89, again, the United States, through the CIA, was paying a significant amount of money to truckers, people who were providing transport back and forth across the border. This order where the United States basically got to call the shots and is coming to a halt. And that is creating a lot of chaos in the West. The United States thought it could basically break up. All they had to do was apply pressure to Russia and that Russia would crumble. And it predicated on an assumption that Russia was weak, that Russia had no industrial base, that Russia's military was corrupt, that Putin was incompetent. What terrible assumptions those were, because it turned out to just be the opposite. Under Vladimir Putin's leadership, over the last 25 years, we've seen Russia literally rise from the grave. If you go back to 1999, 2000, you'd look at Russia and say, "Oh my God, this society is falling apart." The average life expectancy was decreasing, not increasing. The industries and natural resources were being plundered. It was really sheer chaos. The systems in the cities didn't really work. People didn't have much to buy in the stores. And Putin got in there and turned it around. Now, he still engenders lots of criticism in the West, but the fact of the matter is that instead of Putin robbing the country to line his own pockets, buying luxury automobiles, buying hookers, prostitutes, indulging himself with luxury residence, he made sure that the people of Russia actually started experiencing some economic benefits. At the same time, starting about 1999, the United States was, on the one hand, we were fighting this let's call it the Salafist jihadi movement within Sunni Islam. And it has roots in Pakistan with the Deobandi. And so that sort of the unity of the Deobandi and the Muslim Brothers created this, I'll call it a trans-Islamic vision. It wasn't tied to any specific cause, such, Hamas and Hezbollah they're talking about recovering land, which is theirs in Palestine. And they're not tied to this, what I'll call the trans-Islamic vision. But the emergence of, so what you had was the United States, on the one hand, was being attacked by Al-Qaeda. And then on the other hand, was providing financial support to Islamists who were ideologically, theologically in sync with Al-Qaeda, and providing them with support that was in Bosnia, Herzegovina, as an example. In Dagestan, Chechnya, during that war that went on for 10 years. So the United States established, at least through the CIA, it was quite willing to fund what the West then derisively calls Islamic extremism, at the same time that it declares openly that it's fighting Islamic extremism. I mean, that make it, any sane person schizophrenic trying to follow this. The U.S. method, as it evolved under George W. Bush, first under Bill Clinton, then George W. Bush, because we really started getting color revolutions under Clinton, continued under Bush, and then Obama really solidified it. And the U.S. policy became one of three things. Either you do what you're told, or we're going to impose sanctions on you, or we're going to launch a covert action intelligence operation to spark a color revolution, which frankly has been that Pakistan's been a victim of that as well. With by jailing the one presidential candidate and accusing him of treason when he's actually trying to oppose the Western influence, which is trying to keep Pakistan under Western control. And then if that doesn't work, a war. Now, for years, the United States got away with that. It didn't really succeed because, we launched these wars in Afghanistan, launched wars in Iraq, and really didn't achieve any concrete strategic goals. With the confrontation with Russia basically said, we're not going to take this anymore. You don't get to order us around. You don't get to make our decisions. We will make our decisions for our welfare, and we will defend ourselves. Out of that, forged a new relationship with China, because in the past, the United States cynically had played China off of Russia, Russia off of China, try to split them apart so that they'd never come together, recognizing that if Russia and China actually formed a genuine partnership, that it would be an invincible one that the United States could not overcome. Well, the crazy policies of George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, and then Joe Biden have now paved the way that Russia and China are fully in sync. They understand that if they do not hang together, the United States will hang them separately. That their political, economic, diplomatic, military interests are combined. This cooperation, let's call it, has really been underway for at least 6 years. One of the overt illustrations of it is the fact that the Russia and China have been conducting joint military exercises with Iran. Now, again, here's Iran facing persistent sanctions. The United States and West likes to portray Iran as a terrorist state, when in fact, Iran has suffered more terrorist attacks at the hands of the West, including assassinations of prominent physicists and scientists. Whereas Iran has not been carrying out terrorist attacks. I think you go back the last 20 years, in any given year, the United States State Department, which lists the top 10 sponsors of terrorism in the world, not a single one of those most active terrorist groups are linked to Iran. Not one. So what we're seeing emerge with this union of China and Russia is this new world, and it's under the title BRICS, standing for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And the BRICS movement is now picking up support. The global South is waking up and saying, we don't need to submit ourselves to the legacy of this colonial empire. You know, Pakistan itself has been a victim of colonialism. And the tensions that exist in Pakistan, I would argue, in many cases, have been exacerbated by foreign interests meddling in Pakistan's internal affairs for the simple purpose of, as long as we can keep you fighting with each other, you won't have time to worry about what we're doing to you. So what we're witnessing right now, I believe, is the last days of the American empire as a hegemon.
So, Larry, the question that I'm interested in understanding this Ukraine conflict, because I saw when this conflict started, the moment this conflict actually started, Pakistani Prime Minister was moved. So I really got kind of interested in this conflict between Russia on the one hand and Ukraine on the, and kind of West trying to make a coalition against Russia. And I think they kind of asked the support of some of the Pakistani government entities, to support them. And maybe the prime minister actually refused, and he was immediately thrown off. The moment this conflict in Ukraine actually started, Pakistani prime minister was thrown off. So where do you think is this conflict going to end now? As Donald Trump says that he is going to end this conflict maybe in days. Do you think this conflict is going to end in upcoming future?
Well, the decision to end it is going to be, it's in the hands of Russia. It's not in the hands of Donald Trump. All Donald Trump can do is cut off aid to Ukraine and say, okay, we're done. We're not supporting you anymore. You're on your own. Then it's up to the Europeans to see if they want to continue funding the war and making themselves a target of Russia's retaliation. Candidly, Russia, I think by now, should have actually started bombing many of the European capitals, Germany, France, the UK in particular, because they've been carrying out acts of war against Russia. If Russia had unilaterally started attacking those countries, they would immediately respond, retaliate. So I think what we're seeing is enormous restraint, patience on the part of Putin. This effort to destroy Russia and to use Ukraine as a battering ram, that policy's been underway for at least 34 years. You can see over my shoulder here, there's a book titled Provoked by Scott Horton. And Scott lays out in excruciating but exquisite detail the decisions made both by George H.W. Bush, then by Bill Clinton, then by George W. Bush, then by Barack Obama, then by Donald Trump, and then by Joe Biden. Every one of those presidents had decisions that laid the foundation for this war and for Russia finally rising up to defend itself against Western imperialism. And while the West is fond of trying to paint Putin as a dictator, an authoritarian, an aspiring imperialist, they keep talking, he wants to rebuild the Tsarist empire. No, he just basically wants foreign countries to leave his country alone. Leave him alone. Stop meddling. And it's one of those things that I know in your country as well. Your Pakistan has been a victim of continued meddling by the Brits, by the Americans, and we always couch it in terms of national security issues. But the bottom line is, we want to control you and have you do what we want you to do. We want you to obey us. So it's sort of a master-slave relationship. And I think a lot of, growing number of countries around the world are saying, we're tired of this. We're not going to be treated that way. The one thing I have seen with respect to Russia's interaction with other countries is, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, how powerful you are, how big your military is, how many natural resources you have. I've always seen Russia treat representatives of other countries, regardless of status, with the same level of respect. They get treated as equals, not as someone who's lower class than the Russians. That's the big difference I see between dealing with Russia and dealing with the West. With the West, you're going to get lots of will be very condescending and patronizing.
So, Larry, just a last question about this Russia-Ukraine issue before we move on to Middle East. Living in the US for a few years, kind of get the sense of so much Russophobic, so much hatred of. I mean, for me, as coming from Asian country, Middle Eastern country, Russia seems to be white Christians. Why is there so much animosity against Russia? Is this just the lust of mineral wealth that Russia has, or is just the kind of Russia's military prop? What do you think is the root cause of this hatred of Russia, both in the US and in also?
Yeah, it's irrational. There's no rational reason. It'd be one thing with the collapse of the Soviet Union, if Russia had started in the 1990s to start building up an army and then started attacking neighboring countries. But it didn't do that. And despite the fact that Russia was not rearming itself and building an increased offensive capability, nonetheless, under Bill Clinton, decided to ignore Russia's pleas to join NATO first and then not to increase NATO. Clinton signed off on expanding NATO, which creates a threat for Russia, which is going to evoke a response. The second thing that happened was, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, basically 7 gangster clans in Russia took control of most of the natural resources, the gold, the oil, the natural gas, the uranium, really critical sectors. Well, they had partners overseas. They had partners in Western banks. The 7 gangsters, oligarchs, there were oligarchs in the United States, in the United Kingdom, who were benefiting from this. When Vladimir Putin took office, I believe it was in January of 1999, and then was later certified as president. In 2001, 2002, I forget, I need to remember the precise date. He brought in all the Russian oligarchs, and basically, the majority of them were Jewish. Let's not pretend that they were, all Orthodox Christian. They weren't. The majority of them were Jewish, and the majority of their partners overseas were Jewish. So it fed into this, this theme that the Jews control the world kind of thing. But Putin laid it out to him very clearly. He said, "Look, you're going to stop raping Russia. This pillaging is going to stop. We're going to, if you want to stay here in this country and continue to make money, that's great. These foreign relationships where you're just stealing our resources, that's coming to an end. And you're going to stay out of politics. If you can abide by those terms, we'll leave you alone. If you can't, I'm going to put you in prison." So he ended up putting a few in prison, such as Mikhail Khodorkovsky. But it brought an end to that looting, and it brought an end to Westerners being able to control the economic resources in Russia. They still were trying to exert influence. They were going away quietly. But that's what started this hatred of Putin. Putin then stood, he was the first country to contact the United States in the aftermath of the attacks on September 11th in 2001, offering Russian assistance. But I think as he came to discover that the Islamic war being waged by the Chechens, again, drawing upon the theological writings out of the Deobandi movement and the Salafist movement and the Wahhabi movement in Saudi Arabia and the whole Muslim brothers that emerged out of Egypt. He found out that the United States was supporting those very groups that were attacking and killing Russians in massive numbers. And so he embarked upon a pushback against that attack. And then he kept rejecting the U.S. efforts to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. But what's fascinating is at no time, the United States cites, he invaded Georgia in 2008. It was provoked. Georgia attacked Russia, not vice versa. It's just an objective fact. And yet, despite that objective fact, the West continues to try to paint Russia as the aggressor. But what I'm trying to say, to make it very simple, there are no actions that Russia has taken that justify the vilification of Russia as an international threat that needs to be contained. Russia is not the country that has over 700 military bases around the world. That's the United States. Russia, since the fall of the Soviet Union, has not been out invading other countries. The only country they will say is, quote, invaded was Ukraine, and that's been a civil war underway, and I think you can make a very compelling case that Russia was attacked first, not vice versa. But to take that out, Russia hasn't been Russia didn't attack Iraq twice. Russia didn't attack Panama. Russia didn't attack Libya. Russia didn't attack Serbia. Russia didn't attack Syria. We go on down the list. That the United States has been, endlessly involved in wars that have killed millions of foreign citizens of these foreign countries. Literally millions. And it's not just some recent phenomenon. It goes back to Vietnam. So the country that's the imperialist, the country that threatens world peace, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's the United States. And we see it again today. The United States is arming and enabling the government of Israel to murder Palestinian men, women, and children, especially women and children. Estimated 17,000 children have been murdered with the United States support. So, I think people of conscience around the world are starting to wake up and going, we got to stop them. These people can't continue doing this. This is evil. This is wrong.
So, Larry, I want to, the second half, I want to touch about Middle East. The first thing I really want to talk about in the Middle East is this Syrian, regime change operation which has just taken place.
Yeah.
So, what do you make of this? It doesn't look at all, organic. This HTS organization, this rebranded version of, Al-Qaeda has taken over Syria. They have no roots in Syria. How do you think this team is going to last?
Yeah, let's go back to since at least 2011, the CIA and British MI6 have been aggressively involved working with Turkey to try to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad. And to that end, funded, armed, trained insurgents in Syria to attack the Syrian army and to try to that was going on actively in 2011, 2012. In fact, the CIA base in Benghazi was a site in which CIA and British intelligence officers and consultants working for them were collecting weapons throughout Libya, processing them at that facility, and then packaging them up and putting them on board a ship. That the ship then went to Turkey, and the weapons were moved into Syria. This latest transfer, it's so bizarre that on the one hand, the United States claims it's been fighting this global war on terrorism. And when you look at the statistics that are published by the Bureau of Counterterrorism, State Department, every year, it shows that consistently over the last 10, 15 years, the top terrorist groups in the world are ISIS. Well, and since 2017, when Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was created, HTS, it's been in the top 10 of terrorist groups. That means attacks on civilians for political purpose. So, here the United States is now a great enabler of terrorism. But HTS was really also primarily a creature of Turkey. And when you looked at its composition, it's not made up of, angry Syrian Sunnis. Mm-hmm. You've got Chechens, Dagestanis, Uzbekis, Uyghurs. You've got a lot of Muslims from the stands that border southern Russia that are part of that outfit. And yet the collapse came so quick because basically Bashar al-Assad betrayed his country and had refused to, there'd been several efforts over the previous 3-4 months, one to get him to negotiate with Erdogan. He refused to do so. Both Russia and Iran offered assistance. He refused to accept it. It always came a little bit with conditions. Hey, we want you to do this, and he was disinclined to do it. So this Turkey was the leading force in this, but I think if you've watched Donald Trump's remarks in recent days, they declare that, this was all the fault of Turkey. Nonsense. This is also the fault of the United States. And Israel was collaborating with the Turks, or the Turks collaborating with Israel. Look at it however you want. Erdogan, despite paying lip service to wanting to assist the Palestinian people, has basically been an enabler of Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. So now what they've got is, I've described, I said, Syria is the Arabic word for Yugoslavia. And I say that because within Syria, you don't have, the Sunni population accounts for about 70%, maybe 75% of the population. And that's always been one of the historical points of friction, going back to the days of Hafez al-Assad, the father of Bashar, because he's notorious for murdering 10,000 Sunni Muslims in Homs back in the 1970s. But within Syria, you've got the Alawite, which is a version of Shia Muslims. You've got the Shia Muslims. You have the Kurdish populations, and then you have the Druze, which are sort of, they're particularly unique religious form, sort of a cross between Islam and Christianity. And they're in the south. Well, each of these ethnic groups has territory, tribal areas, family areas that they're going to control. So what they've now created, the Turkey, the United States, Israel, by overthrowing the government of Bashar al-Assad, and I'm not making the case that Assad's government was perfect or a respecter of human rights, but at least tried to keep it together as a country, despite intense Western pressure to destroy it, including devastating sanctions. Well, now you got a situation where the Turks want to get rid of the Kurds in the east, but the United States is backing those Kurds. So the United States has got to make a choice. Are they going to abandon the Kurds that they promised to defend? Or are they going to fight Turkey? That's going to be an interesting choice. The Islamists, these jihadists that come out of the Salafist Wahhabi tradition, even though this, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani right now is the face of HTS, good God, he's been totally compromised by the CIA, by Mossad, by MIT. Dressing up in suits and talking about diversity and equality. It's like, what's the next thing? Is he going to come out and say, hey, I'm gay and I believe in LGBTQ rights? That goes over well within the religious Muslim community, just like it goes over well within the conservative Christian community. It's anathema. It's viewed as heresy. So this is a recipe for further chaos. And it remains as, there'll be purging of Christians and Alawites in certain areas, and they'll set up areas that they control, and there'll be fighting back and forth. But this is the end of Syria as a country.
So, Larry, just kind of before moving on to Iran, I just want to kind of bring home one observation. Operation in Syria. From Pakistani experience, I record that in 1980s, when Afghan Jihad was launched by CIA, by Pakistani intelligence services, and Saudi Arabia combined, this looks like a kind of carbon copy, Turkey being used as a kind of, in the same vein as Pakistan used, where across the border, these Islamist jihadists were prepared and then launched against, in 1980s against Afghanistan and now in Syria. Just now, do you think this guy Erdogan, you think his regime is about to end? Because I remember when this Afghan Jihad actually ended, Ziaul Haq, the then dictator of Pakistan, suddenly died in mysterious plane crash. So what do you think because Afghan has been used by the West? Do you think they will allow him to consolidate power? Do you think his regime I think it's about to end. I kind of, because I'm related of that operation in 80s to this operation now. What do you think is the fate of Afghan's, regime?
For Erdogan and the Turks, I don't think it ends well. We've got a long history of countries allowing themselves to be used as pawns of the United States, and frankly, Pakistan is one of those.
Yeah.
Now, and this is not intended as an insult, but the Pakistanis leaders, both military, intelligence within ISI, have always sort of assumed that they're smart enough to control the United States, and I don't blame them for assuming that they're at least as smart, if not smarter than the United States, because we've done a lot of stupid stuff. But inevitably, just by the sheer weight of its, size of the United States, those countries become nothing more than pawns that are expendable, as in any game of chess. Just look at the previous pawns, what's happened to them, whether Diem in Vietnam, with the Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Manuel Noriega in Panama, the Muammar Gaddafi after he cut a deal with the CIA to give up weapons of mass destruction, and CIA betrayed him, and he winds up dead. And I'm not trying to suggest that people like Saddam, Noriega, Gaddafi were morally upright men and men of great character. But neither is it just by the same token, the U.S. leaders don't have much to brag about. As an example, one of the criticisms leveled at Vladimir Putin was he's supposedly ordered the assassination of about 12 people. Oh, really? How many people died on the orders of George W. Bush with the invasions of Afghanistan and the invasions of Iraq? More than 1 million? And so Vladimir Putin's the bad guy and George W. Bush is the good guy? Come on. So by agreeing to become a pawn, I understand why Turkey is doing that. I mean, Turkey's got, historically, Turkey was the man. They were the power there in West Asia or the Levant for 500 years. They were actually a ruling empire for much longer than the United States has been a ruling empire. And so trying to recapture some of that former glory is definitely a motivation for Recep Erdogan. But they've entered into a bargain now where Erdogan's not necessarily going to have full control over the events. And particularly the tendency of these radical Sunni, Salafist, Deobandi groups is, have you ever seen a ball of mercury? It creates a nice orb. And if you hit it with a hard object, it fragments. Still the same constituent elements, but it's all these different parts. That's exactly what these groups, whether we're talking Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Nusra, or HTS, that's what they're all like. They're very rigid theologically. And in that rigidity, they can broker no compromise with someone else, even though, the fact is to a foreigner, a Christian, looking in on these Islamic groups, they would like say, what's the difference? There's no, they all believe in Allah. They all believe in the requirement of prayer each time, each day, five prayers. They all believe in the need to commit to the Hajj. So there's just saying, like, why the differences? But you know how it is. And I've seen the same phenomena within Christianity, the same phenomena within Judaism, where these ultra-religious sects, they start arguing over details. So these Islamist groups are going to splinter, fragment, and Erdogan's not going to be able to control them. And some are going to be beheading, some are going to be murdering Christians, and it's going to really create a nightmare for him. So this is not going to bring peace. That's ostensibly we always engage in these military adventures. At least that's how the American people are sold on these. To bring peace, freedom, democracy. Well, that's ridiculous. It just never it turns out just the opposite. We bring grief and suffering. And look at what has transpired in Pakistan. God, now last 44 years on the border with Afghanistan.
It's a mayhem, right? Last 44 years. So, Larry, I want to talk a bit about this axis of resistance. There is a lot of kind of euphoria in the West, in Israel, especially, that they have kind of broken, this link between Iran, Iraq on one hand, and Lebanon on the other hand, and Syria, the big, the linking chain and the link, a cog in the wheel has been broken apart, and therefore there is no future for axis of resistance. Do you think that Iran's, support will probably end, or do you think Iran will find some ways, to kind of, funnel support?
Well, look, the reason I'm laughing, and look at the history of a place like Karachi or Islamabad, and let's go back like 2,000 years. The trade routes between China going west to places like Greece, Syria, Lebanon, it's 2,000 years old, minimum. There are smuggling routes that have been in existence before the United States was even thought of. So the notion that, oh yeah, we've destroyed Syria, so that's going to break the supply line. Are you kidding me? All that's really done is made it more difficult now for the intelligence, foreign intelligence, to collect and to find out what the hell's going on. Because when it's being done when Syria is directly involved, that gives an intelligence officer, whether they work with Mossad or with CIA or with MI6, a way that they can target that particular element in the Syrian government. Recruit somebody that's going to give them the information. Yeah, we got this shipment coming in this day. This truck's going to be carrying that. Now, they're not going to have that control. It's now outside of their control. And if you think for a minute, because when you look at that border, it's immense. There are not specific choke points. The smuggling routes exist, and the people, the border guards out there always need some extra cash. Let's call them the best border guards that money can buy, because you're going to buy them and they're going to let stuff through. So this, I think it's a foolish belief to think that this is going to bring an end to Iran's, Iran's ability to resupply Hezbollah and Hamas.
Just to kind of support your point of view about this trading routes, you see, if you look at Yemen has no connection, land connection between Iran and Houthis. But still, there is a belief in the West that Houthis are being supported by Iran. So I think there is some kind of trading routes which are kind of hidden, or it's intractable.
Well, yeah. I mean, in fact, let's also look at Gaza. How do you think they got all those weapons into Gaza? I guarantee you that there are Palestinian merchants that were working with Israeli merchants doing business, and that there are Israeli businessmen that profited off of that. So, it's the world of international commerce. A lot of times, the traditional, we think, sectarian differences fall away. I recall, and I spent a lot of time doing investigations on product counterfeiting in Panama's Cologne Free Trade Zone. Well, the Panama Cologne Free Trade Zone is a walled city that has only businesses and banks inside the walls. No restaurants, no hotels. It's all for wholesale. And the merchants are divided accordingly. About 25-30% are Jews out of Lebanon. The other 30% are Muslim out of Lebanon, primarily Sunni, but some Shia. And these have family networks that extend through. They're in Panama, they're in Colombia, in a city called Maicao. They're in Ciudad del Este, down on the border of Brazil and Paraguay, and they're over in Chile and Iquique. I mean, and these family networks reach back, and so we're talking clans. Then there's probably about 15-20% that are Sindhis. So, basically you can call them Pakistanis or Indians. They're out of either Eastern Pakistan or Western India. You familiar with the joke that if you're in a jungle and you come up, you're confronted with a Sindhi or a cobra, they say kill the Sindhi, because the Sindhi's more dangerous. And then the remaining percent in the Cologne Free Trade Zone are, actually Latino, people from Panama or some from China. Well, you'd think that would create these sectarian frictions. And there was a time I was doing an audit of the business that was owned by this chubby, fat little Jewish man. The business is called El Triunfo. He looked like a watermelon with feet. And he was busy preparing a basket. And it was on the eve of Eid. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I'm preparing a gift basket for my neighbor." And his neighbor was a Sunni Muslim. He goes, "Why is that?" He says, "Oh, they protected us during, when America invaded Panama in 1989. We were fearful that the city was going to storm our business and loot us, but our neighbor and the other Muslim merchants protected us."
Oh.
So, there's a sign that when it comes to business, some of the religious differences get put aside and they say we'll come together. So I've seen that, and I think that you're going to see an element of that take place as well.
So kind of just a second last question, Larry, if you have time.
Yes.
What's the future of this Iranian regime? Because I have a feeling that the next target of this, especially the US and the Israeli elites, is to basically destroy Iran. And the events of especially the last year or so, but I think the last 4 years, where we just alluded to that Iranian scientists have been attacked and inside Iran. Iranian president and foreign minister was mysteriously died actually when he was traveling to Azerbaijan. Very circumstances. Do you think that there is technically a regime change operation has taken place, or do you think it has been the penetration of the Western agencies inside the regime has basically made sure that regime has been kind of contained?
I think that the West is going to break itself by trying to destroy Iran. The West is making some very dangerous assumptions that the current regime is wildly unpopular. That's not true. That Iran is weakened militarily. That's not true. That Iran is not technically advanced. That's not true. And I think both Israel and the United States believe they can launch a preemptive attack on Iran that will destroy and destabilize Iran. I think what is actually, if they attempt that Iran's going to be able to defend, thwart the attack, defeat it, in fact, and in the subsequent response by Iran with its missile force, backed by Russia and China, I will add, will destroy significant U.S. military assets in the region, including probably the destruction of the air base at Al Udeid in Qatar. Maybe the sinking of an aircraft carrier or two. Then all of a sudden, the United States is going to be confronted with its weakness. That's one of the most fascinating things. We're now a year since the United States announced Operation Prosperity Guardian to defeat the Houthis, to open the Red Sea to maritime traffic, because by God, those Houthis can't stop us. And we sent aircraft carriers and destroyers and cruisers and F-35 jets and B-52 bombers. And here we are a year later, and the Houthis have thwarted we stopped the United States. The United States couldn't beat them. The rest of the world needs to take notice of that. The Houthis, it's not like the Houthis are some great first world army. They're not. In some aspects, they're a very backward society, but boy, they're warriors. They're incredibly brave, and they prove they've got the ability to fight and stand up to the West. And that's, I think, the West has failed to learn that lesson. And if they attack Iran, they're gonna learn that lesson the hard way.
Finally, Larry, the question about Donald Trump. Do you think Donald is going to have a sway in the upcoming 4 years, or do you think, as happened the last 4 years, the deep state is kind of work, extremely hard to destroy his energy, his agenda? Because we in Pakistan kind of hope that since the last 3 years, the Biden administration have kind of done this regime change operation and repressed Pakistan. Donald Trump would bring some kind of semblance, vis-a-vis, the whole world, and especially towards Pakistan as far as Pakistan is concerned.
Yeah, no, I think I really don't know. Let me put it this way. If Trump lives up to his campaign promises, then yes, we're going to see an end to the deep state. The deep state is going to fight like hell to thwart him, to prevent that from happening. But that would be one of the most. I don't think the movements against former Prime Minister Khan would have taken place without the support of the United States.
Of course.
And in fact, I would argue Pakistan did to Khan with what the Biden administration tried to do to Donald Trump. The difference was Trump is a billionaire and he was able to fight it off. Khan was not and is in prison. And that situation needs to be rectified in my view. But we're in for the potential for a new world. If Trump makes the right decisions, he will go down in history as the most consequential president in American history. If he brings peace to Russia, to China, to Iran. And if he fails to do that and gets sucked into the wars, he will also go down in history, but not in a good way, as the one that brought an end to America and to the international world order.
So, Larry, thank you so much for this kind, slot. I really appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed it also.
Invitation. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's always good to chat with folks. Enjoy getting your perspective as well.